Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today, a quick Saturday short video for you. This is like a Cliff Notes version of a longer video I'm doing. I've been making a bunch of these boxes. I've been using the box joints technique to do it. I am doing a longer video that will incorporate me taking a pallet apart, milling the pallet, making the box joint jig, making the box joints, putting the boxes together, putting bottoms on them, sanding them down, and finishing them, the whole thing. That video was getting to be pretty long. I kind of decided, I don't know that many people want to watch a half-hour plus video on making box joints. Some of you just want to learn how to actually cut these box joints. So what I have done, because in my infinite wisdom I had several camera errors making this video and had to reshoot a few, which is why I have so many boxes here. Not a big deal. I'll use them. I have many uses for these things. But I have enough video now to do a Cliff Notes version here. So this video is going to basically be just making the jig and cutting one corner to show you how to use the jig. So if you're just interested in making a box joint jig and using it, this video is for you. Later in the week, I'm going to release a longer video, which some of the pieces of this video will be in that video, where you're going to see how I made all of these boxes, made the box joint jig, took a pallet apart to get the lumber to make these boxes. The whole deal here. You can see I got like a dozen of them here after I made them all. They're all done now. They all have one coat of boiled linseed oil on them. I'm going to be honest, box joints are very strong. This is 3/8 inch pallet wood, so pine basically, and I gotta be honest guys, these things are very, very strong boxes. You know, some of them actually came out looking really nice. So let's go down to the basement and I will show you very quickly how to put the jig together and use it. Now there's no sense making another one at 3/8 of an inch, so I'm going to make one at 1/8 of an inch to make some very fine fingers. What do you need to actually make this thing? It's very easy. You need yourself a piece of flat stock. You know, this is actually particle board. You can use plywood, you can use MDF, anything that is flat and has a flat edge that will rest comfortably to the base of your table. The most important thing here is to get this thing aligned properly. The size really doesn't matter that much. It just needs to be long enough to be at the edge of your miter gauge, or a little bit past if you have the stock. And then it needs to be this far to the right of the blade to cover your stock so that your stock can be held. So you can see I have plenty of space past my stock here. You wouldn't want it to be here where you're trying to do this with some stock hanging over. But the fact that I have an inch past the miter gauge and still room to cut it, that's perfect. This height at 5 inches is about as low as I would go with one of these. You know, you want it to be high enough that your stock is safely held to it and your fingers are in the air high enough, okay? So I would not go any lower than this. If you're making longer boxes, obviously you have to go higher. The next thing you need to do is set your blade for the depth of the cut. The first cut we're going to make is the slot to put the key in. I'll explain that a little bit more when we do it. The thing you want to know is you want this cut to be slightly lower than the thickness of your stock. Now I have already milled up stock to make a box. I'm actually out of the pallet wood I was using, but to keep the free and found lumber thing going here, this is some oak flooring. If you remember last year, I did a video on oak flooring that a friend of mine gave me. So I milled some of that up, and we're going to make a box out of oak. So I want my blade to be slightly lower than the stock for cutting the slot for the key. I'll explain the reason for that when I get the key in here and I show you how to use it. Okay, so that's slightly lower. It's just where I need it to be. Now, what I want to do is run the kerf to put my key in. So I'm going to set this where I think it's comfortable, about an inch past the left side of my miter gauge. I'm going to give it a good firm hold. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my miter gauge for square. And it is square to the blade. That is important, so you should make sure you do that. Now, an inch past, a good grip on it, fire the saw up. Run the curve through. Now what we need to do is put a key in here, and the key you should make out of hardwood. What I do is I take pieces of hardwood stock that I have laying around in my scrap bin. Got a few pieces here. Here's another piece here. I don't know if I'm going to get lucky, but we'll try. I got lucky. I'm going to tell you why I got lucky, guys. I actually cut this from a piece of oak, and what I did is I used this little Veritas 1/8 inch spacer. So what I did is, this is the set you can see here. It's, you know, Craig makes them as well. You don't have to get the Veritas. I like the Veritas set. But what I do is I just bring the fence over, and you set your fence to the thickness of 1/8 of an inch, which is what this little key is. And it's pretty tricky to get it in there. You make sure you line it up on a piece of carbide, on a tooth. You don't want to just have it independently anywhere. And as you can see, we have another thin piece. I can see this one is actually a little too thin. So it's trial and error. This one I made a little too thin, so that one won't work. But one of the ones I cut earlier does work. So what we want to do next is get the key positioned where we want it and mark it for a cut. And we actually want this to go to about the thickness of your board plus twice the thickness of your stock, so that the key is sticking out thick enough or long enough for you to put 2 pieces of stock on so you can batch cut them. So here is our key. Save this offcut piece. We're going to use this to set the gauge up later. So we're going to need that. But what we need to do now is glue this key in place. Just like that. Okay, so we'll let that dry and we'll come back and set it up. Okay guys, it's been about an hour. This thing is glued up. Now, that's the jig. It's built. We just need to connect it to the miter gauge and configure it. Basically set it to the proper spacing. So the easiest way to do that is get yourself a squeeze clamp ready that you can slide on here. Get your board about 1 inch hanging over on the left so you have some nice coverage. And then this offcut that I said we're going to save, what we're going to do to that is we're going to take and hold our board to the miter gauge, take this and put it up right next to the blade so that it's touching an actual tooth on both sides, and then slide our board until our key hits that. So in essence what we've done is we've made an 1/8 inch gap between the key and the blade, which is the exact spacing we need. Now while holding this firmly, take your ratchet clamp and get it on there. Now what I like to do is then take and make sure everything is seated firmly, bring it back, and check it again to make sure you've got the spacing you want. And I do. So that's all you have to do to configure it. Now, obviously, this piece of stock makes that easy to configure. I will keep this piece of stock with this board so that if I ever reuse this tool, I'll have it. Now, guys, all you got to do is set the height of the blade. When we cut the key curve, we set the height of the blade slightly below our stock thickness. Now what we want to do is set the height of the blade slightly above the stock thickness. The reason for that is we want the fingers to slightly protrude so they're sticking out. Now that's an exaggeration, but we want them to slightly protrude so we can sand them down. If you have your fingers embedded, you'd have to bring the whole side of the board down to make everything flush. It's much easier to just sand the fingers down, but just slightly. So we just want to be just higher than our stock. Okay, that is just higher. And now you just cut one corner. So we're going to take one long and one short board, and we're going to cut the corner and test it. You always got to do a test, guys. Now, if you are making your boxes to a certain dimension, I suggest milling a couple extra pieces of lumber and do your testing on that. I'm just going to test here, and if they line up, great. If they don't, I'm just going to cut, the little bit of distance off of them and do it again after I make the adjustment, because I don't care what size these boxes are. So if I lose 3/8 of an inch a couple of times before I get it set, so be it. I'm hoping using this key I have it set dead right. So to do this, you take your board and you reference it against the key. You make sure it's nice and flat to the tabletop, reference to the key, and then make your cut. Now, two things of note there. You notice I pushed through and picked it off. In the last batch of boxes I made, I would push through and then pull back, and I noticed I got some gaps in my fingers. I believe that was when I pulled back, I let the board move a couple of thousandths, and that made the cut a little bit deeper. So I just go through and pick it off now. So now what you do is you continue across the whole length of the board by moving the board over and referencing the slot you just cut over your key. Make sure you're referenced flat against the table. This is why we made the key slightly shorter than the slot. If this key was higher than the slot, the board would be up here and it could wobble like that and give you a crooked key. Because the key is slightly shorter, I can reference against the table flat and make a good cut. I'm going to continue across the whole board now. Okay, my cuts just by miracle almost came out to be perfectly at 1/8 of an inch. I only removed a couple of thou for that last cut. That'll just be sanded away. I made a mark here so I know which side I started. If your keys, if your fingers, the last one is a 1/2 finger, you don't have to make the mark because you'll see that this was the last one. You'll know this was your first. The reason we want to know is now we want to run a long board through, and the way to get your long board referenced so that your fingers are staggered is to take the board you just did, flip it 180 degrees so that the first curve you cut actually references right over the key. Then you take your board and you put it up and reference it flush like that, and what that's doing is giving you a perfect 1/8 inch offset, so your fingers should line up. So I got a good hold on it. I'm going to take that away and make my cuts through the whole board. You just go the same as the other one, you just go across the board. So as you can see, there's that couple of thou finger at the end there. I'm just going to break that off. I'll leave it there for now, but I'm going to sand that away. So now, to test your fitness, you can just lay them flat and see if they go together. As we can see, we have a nice tight fit of our fingers. So if we were to turn this sideways, we have a nice finger joint. So that's the finger joints, guys. Okay guys, so that was the Cliff Notes version of how to do it. What I did there is I very quickly showed you how to put that jig together and then ran one corner together, and I actually left it downstairs, but what it does is it lines up nicely. Now if that corner didn't line up nicely, all you do is adjust your jig left or right a little bit depending on how it's not lining up. If your fingers are sticking out too far, your blade is too high. If your fingers aren't sticking out at all, they're not protruding, your blade is too low. We talked about how to set the blade height. But if the fingers aren't lining up, that's a left or right issue where the key and the blade don't have the right gap in between them. So just slide a little to the left or right to get it adjusted to where they line up. So that's the Cliff Notes quick version, guys. I hope you liked this. If you did, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and as always, have a great day. We'll see you in the next one, which will be later in the week, where we do all of these boxes start to finish.